Welcome back, everybody, to another Swift programming tutorial. This is part 12 of our basics series, and in this tutorial we're going to go over loops. A quick definition. Loops are very useful and are used often in Swift. Common uses include using loops to iterate over data and/or to run code until some criteria is met. The two main types of loops are for and while. A very basic for loop looks like this, and these are often also called for-in loops. To create a for-in loop, you use your reserved or keyword for. Then you create some type of an iterator and give it a name, and in this case we've just called it I. And you can think of I as a type of variable or constant that helps you iterate over a sequence. Then you use your reserved or keyword in, and in this case the data set or sequence that we're going to iterate over is an array of numbers 1 through 5. So let's go ahead and uncomment this print and run our code. And you should see down in the console that we get all of the values in that set, 1 through 5, and that is the outcome of the for-in loop iterating over this data set. Okay? Now, a little trick, if you'd like to put all of those numbers on the same line, you can do that by putting terminator inside your print round brackets, and then after the colon, just put an empty set of quotes with a space in between them. So let's go ahead and run this, and you should see down in the console, again, we get the outcome of the for-in loop iterating over the values. However, this time they're all on the same line. Now, if you'd like to put a comma in between those, let's try that. Okay, so you can see now we have the commas added in. So just remember that you can put in a terminator in your print inside the curly brackets of your loop to do different types of things. Now, if you'd like to use a for loop just to do something a certain number of times, you can create the for loop like this. And in place of that I, the iterator, you can just put an underscore. And in this case, let's just use a range. And let's say that we want to print hello 10 times. Okay, so you can see down here in the console, we used our for loop with a range to do something 10 times. And since we didn't need that I, like we stated up here, we just put in an underscore. In our next example, let's go over how to use a for loop with a range just a little bit more. So we have created our for loop here, and we have typed out for I in a range of 1 through 10. And in this case, we have gone ahead and created our iterator, and then we just put that inside of a print. So let's go ahead and run this. And what you can see down here in the console is that for loop iterated over the range of 1 through 10 and printed out each individual number from that range. So in this case, we're using a closed range, but you could also use a half open range that looks like this. Now we can go ahead and run this again, and that should go up to 10 but not including 10 and give us 1 through 9. Okay? Now, if you'd ever like to include the integer index along with the data that you iterate over, you can do that using this syntax. So we have created an array here with the elements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're going to iterate over those elements, and we're going to include the index along with the item. So notice this syntax here. We have typed out for in round brackets, index, comma, item, in array 1 dot, and then use your enumerated function. So let's go ahead and print this out. You can see the left column here has the index 1 through 5, and then the right column here has the items in that array. Now you can also use a for loop to loop through or over a dictionary. So here we have a dictionary with the different planets and their associated moons. And to loop through this dictionary, you can use this syntax. So we have typed out for in round brackets, key, comma, value, in dictionary 1, which is this dictionary here. So let's go ahead and print this out, and then we will go over the ternary conditional operator. Okay, so you can see down here in the console, we get all of the planets with their number of moons. Now, just to explain this syntax a little bit further, just in case you're not familiar with the ternary or conditional operator, what we wanted to do is try to properly add an S to the moons if they're plural, and we've gone ahead and left it moons even if it's 0, but if it's 1, we just want it to say 1 moon. Now, one way to do that is by using the conditional operator, and it looks a little bit complicated at first, but basically what it's saying is if the value from our key value pair, so that would be the number of moons, equals 1, do this. Otherwise, do this. So it's kind of like a simplified if statement. So you put the condition before the question mark, and then after the question mark, you put what you want to do, and if it does not meet that condition after the colon, you give it somewhat of an else or default action, okay? Next up, in this example, we're going to use a for loop with the stride function. And the stride function takes 3 inputs, a from, a to, and a by. And I kind of like to think of these as a start, a stop, and a step. And the reason I like to think of it as the start, stop, and step is because that's a little bit more memorable, because everything starts with an S. So this would be your from, to, and by, or your start, your stop, and your step. So in this example, we're going to loop through a sequence of numbers that start at 5, go to 101, and increment or step by 5. Now you can see the output down here in the console, but it's a little bit hard to see, so let's go ahead and add a terminator. So now you can see down here in the console, we go from basically 5 to 100 and increment by 5. Now you can also use the stride function with a for loop to count backwards. So in this example, we're going to start at 10, we're going to go to -1, and we're going to increment by -1. Let's go ahead and run this. And you can see we get our countdown from 10 all the way to 0. Now, if you don't get exactly what you would expect from this from, to, by, or start, stop, step, just play with the numbers a little bit until you get exactly what you want. Here we have an example of a nested loop. So we have 2 for loops, and we have our first for loop here, and then we have our nested for loop here. And then inside this second nested for loop, what we want to do is use the I and the j in the ranges of 1 through 12, and we want to create a multiplication table. Let's go ahead and run it. And you can see down here in the console, we get our multiplication table. Okay, so earlier we mentioned there are 2 main types of loops, the for loops and the while loops. So this is an example of a while loop. While loops can be used in all different types of ways, and you can actually use while loops very often in the same ways that you can use for loops. However, where they tend to differ is that for loops are typically created when you have some idea of what's in the collection that you want to iterate over, or when the loop will stop, whereas while loops are sometimes used when you're not exactly sure when the loop will stop. Now that's not to say that you should set up endless loops, because that's not good, but we'll show you an example of using a while loop to run until it meets a certain criteria, but you just don't know what that criteria is or when it will stop. Now, in its most basic setup, you typically want to set up a while loop with a start, a stop, and a step. Okay? So to create the start, we just create a variable and set it equal to 1. Then we use our reserved or keyword while, and then it evaluates that start. So we say while a, and the a is what we created here, is less than or equal to 10. Okay, so this is our start, this is our stop, this print is what we wanted to do, along with our step. Okay, so we said start, stop, step. Just one more time, this is the start, this is the stop, and this is the step. So this is going to start at 1, it's going to run until it's less than or equal to 10, and it's going to increment by 1 while it's looping. Let's go ahead and run it. And you can see down here in the console, we get what we expect. 1 through 10, we're good to go. Now in this example, we want to use a while loop with a continue statement. Okay, so we've created our start, this is our stop, this is our step, so it's going to start at 0, it's going to loop until it's less than 10, it's going to increment by 1. However, we're going to add another condition, and we want to say if any of the numbers are even. So that's what this syntax does. And then inside the curly brackets, we say continue. And essentially what this will do is it will continue or it will skip the evens. So let's go ahead and comment this out and run it. So you can see down here in the console, it started at 0, it looped until it was less than 10, and it skipped the evens. So we get 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay, so this is that example that we mentioned earlier. This is going to use a while true loop, and we have set up some criteria for this loop to run through a series of random numbers, but then if it reaches a certain specific random number, and we don't know how long that will take, we want to go ahead and break out of that loop, and then we're going to do something. Okay, so let's go over this code a little bit. Here we have created an empty array. Then we create our while loop and we say while true. So basically this will just run until some criteria is met. Then inside the while loop, we have created a random number. And this random number can range or vary from 1 to 100. Then here, we're going to go ahead and append those numbers to our empty array that we created up here. And the reason we're doing that is so we can get a final count to see how many numbers the while loop encountered before it reached 25. Okay, so our criteria is if the random number equals 25, go ahead and break out of that loop and stop. Okay, so we have used two prints with this example to help us see what's going on. So let's go ahead and run this. So this print will display the random numbers and all of the random numbers that this while loop had to loop through until it reached 25. And then this print is the count of those numbers. Now we're going to go ahead and run this several more times, and what you'll see is because we're using randomness, this is going to change each time. So this first time, it only had to run 7 times before it reached 25. Let's go ahead and run it again, and you can see this time it had to run 31 times. Let's run it one more time, and this time it had to run 54 times. Okay? Now, there is one more type of while loop. It's called a repeat loop or a repeat while loop. And this type of loop is used less often. So we're not going to go over a specific example of that here. However, the basic syntax looks like this. And we may go over a specific example of a repeat while loop in the future if needed. Okay, so that's all we have for this Swift tutorial on loops. We will be doing many more Swift tutorials in the near future. Join us for those, and we'll see you next time.